Are you in love with panels but struggle cutting them for your quilt? Let me help you with that. Hi, it's Fran Morgan with Fabric Café. Panels are such a fun addition to a quilt. Sometimes cutting them can be tricky. So today we're going to look at how to cut out a square panel block and a full-size panel block to make them work for your quilt. Plus, I'm going to step you through how to make 2 of our patterns from our new book, Panel Perfect 3-Yard Quilts. So let's get started. Now, when the fabric is printed, it is printed perfectly straight on the fabric. However, whenever it goes back to the manufacturer, it's printed and put on big long rolls, they're going to take it to a facility which they fold the fabric and then roll it onto a bolt. And sometimes whenever they double fold it and roll it like that, it kind of shifts the fabric and stretches it a little bit. So that's the reason why some of the panel squares can be a little bit wonky. I have a whole yard of panels here. Let's start by cutting them apart so that I can show you how we get these squared up. I'm going to measure in between these panel blocks, okay? So in between these panel blocks, it looks like I have about 2.5 inches. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut one row of these panel blocks off to start with. I'm going to cut about 1 1/4 from the edge of the panel block right in the middle between these 2 panel blocks. Now, whenever you do your blocks, there may be a different measurement in that space between. So be sure and measure it and just cut it in half. And that way you get a cut right in the middle. Okay, now what I'm going to do, I'm going to trim this part off because this part is not part of my quilt and it's going to be just kind of in the way. So I'm going to go ahead and trim again on this side. Once again, I'm going to make sure I leave plenty of room around my panel block so that I can square it up later to the right size. Now, some of these panels have these cool borders on them like this. If it were me, I would put this in my little stash and use this later. Now I'm going to cut it apart doing the exact same thing. So here, from top to bottom here, bottom top, it looks like there is about 2 inches of space. So I'm going to put my ruler at 1 inch along the line and go ahead and cut it. That way I'm right in the middle between the 2 blocks. I'm going to grab my square ruler. This is going to be super handy whenever I go to square these up. Now, the first thing I'm going to do to square these up is I'm just going to look at it and see, okay, just how wonky is it? All right, so it looks like I am just a little bit out of square and it's kind of going that way a little bit. So I'm going to straighten this panel up. I have a couple of additional tools that we're going to use. Some masking tape, spray bottle with water. I know that this edge was pretty straight, so I'm going to measure this again and make sure that I have a nice straight edge here between the edge of my panel block and where I cut it, the edge of the fabric. This is the edge I'm going to use to straighten this. So what I'm going to do is line it up with the grid on my mat, and I'm going to use a little bit of masking tape and tape it down. So I'm right on the line here. I'm taping it down exactly on that line, so I know I'm working with one straight edge. I'm going to put my ruler on it one more time on those 2 lines, and this needs to shift this way. So I'm going to gently spritz it with the water so that it's damp. What the water does is it just helps the fibers in the fabric relax so that you can reshape it. So what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of give it a very gentle smoothing. That's taped down here, so this is staying. Because we were only about 1/4 inch out of square, if you use the wrong side of your ruler, the slippery side, it's a little bit easier to work with. So I'm going to put this back on here. I'm going to line up my lines. And all right. I'm almost not tall enough to see that top edge up there. I'm lined up on this side. Oh, that's pretty good. See, just that little gentle push is all we needed. I'm going to tape this other edge down because I know it is now square, and I'm gonna let this dry. You do not want to pick it up while it's still damp, because if you do that, it could shift those fibers again. Go ahead and let it completely dry. Now, if you want to speed up the process of drying, you can use an iron. You do not want any steam in your iron, and you want to block it. So meaning when you put your iron on it, go up and down. Don't push it. That way it doesn't move it more than what you need it moved. But that's going to speed up the process a little bit. And that is so simply how you square up your blocks. That's all you have to do. We're going to let this dry, and then we're going to come back and trim these up to our perfect size. Now I need to cut it at 10.5, and it looks like it is 9.5 wide. And you can see it's 9.5 right there. However, whenever I measure this way, it looks like it's about 10.25. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna center it on the sides first and trim those. Then I'm gonna turn it. Here's my 10.5 mark right here. So I have a 1/2 inch here and a 1/2 inch there so that we know it's nice and square. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and trim these edges. I'm going to turn it. We know we have a good cut on this side. So I'm gonna put that cut edge on my 10.5 line and cut the other side. We are now centered this way. So I'm gonna turn it this way and trim it and make sure we're centered on this side. Now remember, we need a 10.5 inch square. I'm gonna do one more measurement, measuring from here to there. It looks like my 10.5 is here, so I'm just gonna need little bits. So I'm going to put this 10.5 inch line on this cut line because I know we're straight here. And I'm gonna look up here and say, okay, about 1/8 of an inch here and 1/8 of an inch here so that we know we're centered right there on that panel. I'm gonna make sure I get my ruler straight on this line. We're good to go there. It looks like we're centered, so I'm gonna give that a trim. And at this point, I should be exactly 10.5, 10.5. I just have to line up those 10.5 inch lines and then trim this top. Now, there we go. We have our perfectly centered panel block from cutting it and trimming it, and it's ready to be sewn into our quilt. Now you're going to repeat this process for all of your panel squares for your quilt. Just follow the same method, no matter what size panel block that you have. Now, if you don't want to go through the whole process of straightening it with the spray bottle and taping it and letting it dry, you certainly don't have to do that. You'll basically square it up the same way. Just keep in mind that it could be just slightly off, and if that doesn't bother you, by all means move forward. Okay, let's look at this Santa Fe quilt all made up. It is gorgeous. I absolutely love the way that the Fabric 3 creates those little corner pieces on each of those panel blocks. And then of course it's framed out nicely top and bottom with a really great border. And you know what? That top and bottom border, the block borders are all done with stitch and flip, so it's gonna be so fast and so simple to put together. Okay, let's step through how we made our border pieces for our panel block. And what we basically have here is a rectangle of our number 3 and a square of our number 2. What we've done is we have drawn a line diagonally from corner to corner, and then we put these right sides together, and then we're gonna sew almost on the line. I'm gonna give you a tip about that too. So when we've stacked these and we're ready to put them in our machine, it works best if you put it into your machine on this side where there's a long edge and not on the point right here. If you put it on that point, sometimes it causes it to get eaten by your machine. I bet you guys know what I mean by that. But if you put it in right here, there's a little bit more surface for your machine to grab onto, and it just makes it go a little smoother, I think. So we're gonna use the line as our guideline. And something else that I've learned, another little tip for you, is I sew just right on the side of this line right here. just a little bit. I mean, you're almost on the line, but not quite on the line. And what that does is whenever you go to fold this over like this, it gives you just a little bit of space for that fold over so that it falls just perfect. We're gonna take our ruler and we're gonna trim 1/4 inch from this sewn line right here. And this gives us our seam allowance. Take this to our iron and we're gonna fold this over, and you're gonna have this right here. That's a pretty easy thing. Now, another thing that I always do is I like to press my seams open on these because it keeps it all really nice and flat. Okay, we are going to make 18 of these. This is one of our units, and this is the basis of all of the parts in this quilt. We're gonna do some more the opposite direction. So remember how I showed you this one right here and we're going this way? Well, on our next set, we're just gonna turn this and it's gonna go the opposite direction so that we have this. So see how those are opposite? It's that simple, we're just rotating them. Now we're gonna make 18 of those as well. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're gonna have a fabric number 2 rectangle that we sew right on top of that, just like that. We have 2 different sizes of these. So here is our stitch and flip pieces with our rectangle sewn on. And then here is our second size stitch and flip pieces with a larger rectangle sewn on there so that we have 2 different sizes. So let's bring in our handsome wolf here. So handsome. Now our shorter units that we've made are going to go top and bottom because it's smaller. Now you can see that one side is our number 3 and one side is our number 2. So be sure and check the pattern and make sure you have these on the right side. So on our top, our fabric 3 goes on the right, and on the bottom, our fabric 3 is on the left. So you can see how that's gonna fit nicely. Other units are a little bit longer, and they are gonna go on the sides. Now the trick here, which is really great, our fabric number 3 is gonna match. And then all this angle needs to go the same direction. Now our seam allowances are still on this, and that's the reason why they don't look like they're matching up exactly, but they will. So, and then here is our other border here, and we're matching our number 3 fabrics here. Our angle's still going the same direction, and it's gonna work perfect. Let's talk about the border at the top and bottom that we've done. These are also done with stitch and flip, which is cool. Now remember whenever we were marking our little squares, putting them right sides together with our rectangles and then trimming them? Well, we have basically done exactly the same thing. We have a little bit smaller size here. We have 2 stitch and flips that we've put together. Now we're going to do another piece that has a stitch and flip on both ends. Then we're gonna sew these together. And you know what? That's basically the pieces of this, because as we start putting this together, it creates our cool block. So we're sewing these together, and then these just get rotated this way and this way, and it creates that border across the top and bottom. So cool, so fast. It's really fun to put together. It's kind of neat to watch it grow as you're doing this too. Now let's talk about cutting a full yard panel. It's a little bit different, but I've got some tricks for that too. Full-size panels are a little bit different because of how much fabric we're working with, but we're going to follow very similar steps to what we did for the smaller squares. First, I want to get an initial trim on it so that I don't have so much to work with if I don't have to, so that we can reshape it. So I'm going to check the pattern and see how big the panel needs to be cut. Then I'm going to trim it doing a fat trim, what I call lovingly a fat trim, which means bigger than what I'm going to need. I'm going to just take my long ruler and I'm going to check this measurement. That's at 24, and I'm just doing it a quick measurement, nothing just super specific. Okay, so I have plenty. I'm going to be able to give a fat trim here. I have plenty of room here. And then we're going to also measure it top to bottom as well to make sure. Now, I've already done that part, so I know that I can trim this beautiful border off right here. And of course, I'm gonna save this in my stash because I wanna use it. I am going to turn this, and using my long ruler again, I am going to cut right along this blue line right here. If you don't have a border on your panel, you certainly can use the selvage to do this. There we go. And now I'm going to turn it around. Let's turn it this way. And I am going to cut off this selvage. So have a nice straight edge there. Now what I'm going to do, because I have a bigger panel and it's not just a panel block, I'm going to get my great big 16.5-inch ruler and check to see if this is square or not. This one works really well because it has this blue line on the edge, so you can see very easily. So I'm going to line the top edge of my ruler along the edge of this blue line. And can you see how this goes this way? So we need to kind of shift this over, get it a little bit more square for ourselves. So I'm going to line this up on my mat, and I am going to put just a little bit of this masking tape on there. I'm doing this just to hold it in place so that whenever I start shifting it, it doesn't go anywhere. So there's that one. Just gonna put 3 on here. And I would encourage you to use as much tape as you need to hold it in place. And often as I go and I'm remeasuring this, I will adjust this tape sometimes. Okay, quick spritz with water, just to kind of help those fibers in the fabric relax. We're gonna put slippery side down so that we can move our fabric. I'm gonna line the top edge up with the blue line again. Now I am going to start giving this just a little pull so that it lines up over here. All right, and you see how we're just getting this so that this side lines up. Okay, this blue line is looking great on my ruler. Let me straighten this one up here. Here we go. Let's straighten this. Make sure our top line is still straight. I am going to put a piece of tape over here. Okay. Now I'm going to shift this over and we're going to do this side. All right, let's get a straight line here. Look at that. Already just from this, it looks like it's lining up. Now let me go back over here. And I'm just going to keep going back and forth. Always go back to your main line that you know is straight. We're taking everything off of this edge. We're good there. Okay, and let me look at this one more time. We are doing great here. Just pull this over so it's perfectly straight on the edge of the ruler. Grab another tape and tape it down on this side. Now, hopefully you have a little bit bigger surface to work with than I do here, but you would go all the way around all the edges. Sometimes the fibers in the fabric could buckle like this. I have found that as I stretch the whole thing and start taping it and spritzing it, if there's just a little bit of fullness in there, I can go back, give it a little spritz, and just gently kind of pat it into place. Now, you would do that after the whole thing is squared and taped down on your table. Then you're gonna let it dry. And then once it's all dry, we can go back and square it. Now we have our squared full yard panel here. It's all ready to be trimmed to the proper size. All right, we're gonna consult the pattern to find out what size do we need to cut the panel for our project. In this case, we need to cut this 34.5 inches from top to bottom, so that's tall. So I'm gonna turn this, and what I'm gonna do is measure this border. You know these panels that have these borders and these places like that that you can measure makes it so easy. I'm just going to quickly get a measurement with a tape measure like this, just so that I can see what I'm working with here. So it looks like it is 32.5 inches from the outside blue border to the outside blue border here. So I need to cut it at 34.5. So I need to add 2 inches. And I want to keep my panel centered, so I'm going to cut it 1 inch on the bottom and 1 inch on the top extra so that it falls right in the middle. And because this has been squared, I can use my blue border here as a guide. And I got my rough side down, and I am going to line it up and cut it exactly 1 inch from the outside of my border. Okay, now I'm going to turn this all the way around so I can trim the bottom. Going to give it a trim there. This is what I do when I quilt by myself. I constantly talk to myself saying 1 inch, 1 inch, 1 inch, or 1.5, whatever I need, so I don't forget. Okay, we are good top to bottom. We have the right finished cut for our pattern. Now we need to do it the other way. And in our case, we need a piece that is 28.5 inches wide. Now let's check the width of our panel. We're going to use our measuring tape again just to get a general idea of where we are. And going across, it looks like we are right on 28.5 inches, which is perfect. That's exactly what the pattern calls for. So what I'm going to do is I am going to trim right on this blue line here. Now that's what I measured from the outside to the outside. So I can take my long ruler here, and because we know this has been squared up, I can just line it up right on that line there. And we're going to give it a trim. Okay, we are going to turn this around so I can cut the other side. And there is our final cut. Now, if this did not fall exactly where the line was, I could have measured in from the blue line to cut it a little smaller, or I could have measured a little bit outside of the blue line to make it the exact size that I needed. So the blue line on this panel I just used as a guideline, which I think works really well, and you cut your panel accordingly to what the pattern calls for. Now, I don't really like to fold my panels in half to cut them. I think it's harder just to make sure it's centered that way. I like to leave it open and flat so that I know that I'm getting it exactly center and where I need. And like I said before, measure twice or even 3 times and cut once just to make sure we're good to go. Let's look at an image of what we're making. Now here is that Manhattan quilt all put together. I think it is striking. We have those great corner blocks that almost makes it look like a picture frame around the panel. And there's not as much piecing as it seems to be. You make one pieced block and the rest is just strip assemblies and units cut into the blocks. Both of these kits I'm working with today are available at fabriccafe.com. We have even more great panel options too, so be sure to check those out. Now, let's look at how to make this quilt. Now we're going to start with our blocks and our unit A's. So the first thing that we are going to do, a half square triangle, very simple, and we're going to put 2 rectangles, one on the top and one on the bottom. One of the tips that I like to share is I always kind of think about it whenever I'm piecing, and in this case we're putting the number 3 against the number 2 and the number 2 against the number 3. And if I keep that in my mind as I'm working this, I know I'm getting it right. And then once we do that, here we go. That's our very middle unit. Very, very simple. Now we're going to make our other units. What we have done here is cut a rectangle, and we are going to be sewing a half square triangle on top of it. Now this triangle is a little bit different size, and we're going to do exactly the opposite of we did here. we're actually going to match our fabric to here. And then here is one that I have all put together. And then we're going to do our very last piece that goes on this side. And it's very similar to this unit, except for we are using our fabric 3. So we have our fabric 3 as a rectangle with a half square triangle sewn to it. And once again, we are matching our fabric 3s. And then here I have one all done up. And once we have these units made, all we're going to do is sew them together. And what's cool about this, and now we're kind of going backwards again, you see how the blues match here and then the yellows match here? That would be the thing that I keep in mind when I'm sewing them together, just to make sure that it's bordered in yellow on this side, bordered in blue on that side. So it's kind of a little trick. I'm always kind of making up those little things as I go along to make sure I don't have to pull Jack out, because you know, no one likes to do that. Here is our finished block all put together. You can see our yellow on one side, our blue on the other, and that really cool diagonal line that is created from our half square triangles. This is the main block we're working on. Now these blocks are actually sewn to strip assemblies that are on the sides and the top and bottom of the quilt. This is a little bit different what we did this time. So we have a strip assembly made with our fabric 3 and our fabric 2, and we have 4 strips that we have sewn on the long edges all the way selvage to selvage. Now whenever we go to cut these, we're actually going to cut 2 different sizes from the same strip assembly. So we are going to be cutting a block B and a block C out of this one assembly. This longer one is the pieces that go on the long sides. The shorter one is on the top and bottom. We are simply going to be putting one of these blocks at the top and the bottom of our strip assembly. These are sewn to each side of the quilt. For our top and bottom pieces, we're going to sew 2 of these blocks on each end and then sew those on our top and bottom of our quilt. There's only a few of these blocks that you have to make, so there's not like a whole lot of half square triangles or anything like that. Now the rest of this quilt, once you have it bordered with your pieces here, it's just borders like normal for the rest of the quilt. And then you have a finished quilt top. Do you have any tricks for working with panels? Let us know in the comments. I would love to hear them. If you would like to see all of our new panel patterns from this book, then be sure to watch the video that pops up. Happy quilting!